Sponsored by PCBWay, more on them in a minute. Hey, welcome back. This is my ultimate Game Boy Advance. But first, I got my hands on this one, which has seen some better days. We're going to fix it and turn it into the ultimate solid metal, IPS screen, rechargeable battery version. But first, let's talk about this donor I bought from eBay for 30 bucks. It powered on and did output to the screen with a game in it. This was essential because that means I didn't have to troubleshoot power issues, and generally, the chips on the motherboard are in good condition. The more beat up the better, since we're going to replace that shell, but I can't help but wonder what this went through in a past life to look like that. Stick around because I ran into some self-inflicted issues fixing this, which is why I bought a hot air station, which I'd show you, but Amazon's 50-50 on that 2-day delivery, right? Once again, we're going to be building this solid metal Game Boy Advance, that IPS screen, rechargeable battery, USB-C power. This body is CNC machined aluminum with some weight to match. My childhood Game Boy Advance with batteries weighs in at 195 grams, and this new one with its battery and shell weighs in at 287 grams, which is double the advanced SP. It's 12 more than an analog pocket. Boxy Pixel also sells brass shells, different color anodized shells, drop-in IPS screens, battery packs that are guaranteed to fit. These are expensive, supplies are limited, $200 to my door, excluding the donor, but for a unique product, I don't feel the price is excessive for what you get, since blocks of aluminum and CNC machining is not cheap. Before we reshell this, we need to fix the audio. I have a funny playing speaker we'll put in first, and if that doesn't work, I have new capacitors that we're going to do anyway, but should address any remaining issues if there are some. Step 1 is to, of course, disassemble, remove the batteries, and a few screws on the back to get you to the motherboard. 2 screws on the PCB, you lift it off, exposing the speaker, capacitors, and all the other components. To replace the speaker, you just remove the old one by heating the solder and pulling on each wire. To test, we need to place the back on because it has the battery contacts, and we have some extremely soft volume, which is technically an improvement, but not good enough. It's important to note that the headphone jack does work and works better than the speaker, so that does limit our scope here. The next step to fix this issue is a recap kit, which are replacement capacitors. In a Game Boy, the capacitors smooth out the power delivery, so when they go bad, they commonly cause these audio issues and display issues. Remember that hot air station? You should use that, because if you have a soldering iron like I do at the moment, you need to be very careful. Add some flux to each old capacitor to get the heat spread around underneath, and very, very lightly pull on each side of the capacitor as you heat up the solder on that side. Repeat until each side is done. If you aren't careful, you will pull the pads up to and destroy your PCB. Ask me how I paid 200 bucks to learn that lesson in the comments, and subscribe on your way down. Repeat this process for all 5 capacitors. While we're soldering new caps on, I want to tell you about our sponsor PCBWay. If you're looking for professional custom PCBs, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or CNC machining, they can do that for you. They can help you with large volume projects, small volume, even one-offs. New customers can get $5 off by using the link in the description below. With a new speaker and capacitors, our sound is loud, and well, the Game Boy never sounded amazing in the first place, and we didn't upgrade any other audio components, so it sounds stock, but maybe a little louder. Let's keep building. Boxy Pixel has instructions for you to follow on their website, and I had them up too on my screen during the build. It has what you'd expect, like remove the motherboard from the old shell, remove the buttons and membranes. First big change is installing that aftermarket IPS screen, although still fairly simple. The power board came with a 3D printed mount, and we have more soldering to do. When soldering the power to the motherboard, be sure you have the diode on the red power line, and you can get away with 28 gauge wire, but I didn't have that, so I used 20 gauge wire, which was complete overkill and barely fit actually. Just like the soldering to the motherboard, solder the battery wires to the power board with enough slack to place the battery on top. I ran into an issue here. At some point I screwed up the install and it took me a minute to figure out I blew the fuse between the battery and the power switch. I first cleaned the power switch by unsoldering this cover and cleaning the internals, which is a common power issue as grime builds up inside. Without any success, I brought out the benchtop power supply, supplied 3 volts 1 amp to this capacitor on the other side of the power switch, and not only heard the speaker, but very carefully flipped it over to see my screen had a nice, bright Game Boy logo. Just a warning, this is the real reason I bought the hot air kit. There is some serious solder gore here, and I'm sorry, but I promise to put my mistakes on full display so you don't make them. I'm going to get roasted in the comments. The fuse is tiny, and I just got a pointed soldering tip for this. With larger objects like the capacitors, you can kind of Austin Powers your way off the PCB by moving each side a little bit at a time, but not here. It's even too small for my solder wick to pull that solder up. I ended up overheating it and destroying the fuse where it literally disintegrated away. Normally, if it works, it's not stupid, but this was stupid. Do not do this. Eventually, the pads were clear. I was able to place the new fuse and get it soldered in. I think at the end of the video, I'll show the uncut soldering gore. Our power switch works perfectly now, so let's finish this up. If you're reusing stock shoulder buttons, then you may have some trimming to do, but I bought the aluminum shoulder buttons, which are just drop-in replacements. Move the battery into its position above the power board, and place the back on. I half screwed in the back so it wouldn't fall off, because now you need to make sure your shoulder buttons are in the holes they pivot on. My shoulder buttons didn't work until I had this right, because you can still fully close the shell if they aren't in the right housing. Finally, apply the front screen cover after cleaning any fingerprints you might have left behind. I honestly would have done this before any work started because I never needed to go through the front. And there it is, a fully aluminum Game Boy Advance that you can use in home defense if your Glock isn't nearby. Coming in at 287 grams, it has that premium feeling and shine. The IPS screen is bright and beautiful, and I appreciate the brightness controls when playing it at night. Hold the select button, tap the shoulder buttons to adjust your brightness. Lowering your brightness would increase your battery life, and I apparently had my left and right brightness controls mixed up. I'm not going back in to fix that. Speaking of batteries, the 2000 milliamp rechargeable battery matches the 2000 milliamps you would find in a pair of AA batteries, so you will get a little less life overall with a bright screen. But best of all, you can charge this with any USB-C charger, so you're not spending any money on replacements. I said this before, this thing feels good. I can't accurately explain how it feels. You know it's metal, it feels like metal, feels great to hold like a quality tool, although I'd bet it gets tiring if you played it for a while because it's so heavy. To me, it's a conversation piece. And I have this analog pocket that I'll usually be playing on. This is the first original hardware I've modded with the screen, and I didn't expect it to be this bright, look this great, or be this easy to install. I also didn't have to solder 40 tiny pins like some other screen replacements. I'll have to look at other aftermarket screens with filters, or that Game Boy Color OLED screen. I really want that. The D-pad feels different as expected, but I can't say I prefer it, and the shoulder buttons honestly aren't great. I think giving up the spring was a mistake, although I don't feel it impacted me actually playing the device. The biggest gripe is my EverDrive didn't work until it did. It stopped and didn't take any inputs when on the menu screen, while all my other Game Boy Advance flavors did work with it. I suspect it's because of a power issue, probably voltage, but I can't confirm that, and it works now, so anything I say is speculation. I like collecting hardware, not really into software, so that was a huge relief it works now. $200 out the door for all the parts, excluding the donor, I got for $30 off eBay, so about $230 all in. Was it worth it? Well, I think it is for exactly one, if you're a collector, and if you're excited about the idea of a metal Game Boy of any generation. If not, stick with the other really cool plastic shells out there, especially the UV ones, and you'll save a significant amount of money. This is a low volume product. You can see the machining on the inside. So boutique products will always cost a little more, so while expensive, I feel the price is fair for what you get if a metal Game Boy is what you want.